My name is Scott Malloy. I'm a senior career advisor at the RISD Career Center. So before we dive into it, I just want to offer kind of my perspective on networking, because I think sometimes when people hear the word networking, they might have like a negative connotation. It can be one of those things that can either be like intimidating or have kind of like icky vibes to it. They might not really be sure what to make of it, or they might think of it as like, oh, it's just kind of like a means to an end kind of a thing. And this is the way like I think about networking, and I think it's maybe helpful to think about it this way. Like, and the reason why this has, building relationships in the title is I really do think it is about building relationships with people authentically, finding people who are, sharing the same passions, enthusiasms, professional interests as you. And like, I think the term like that you hear people say sometimes, like finding your people, I do think that's essentially what like networking is about. It's about like finding your people out in the working world that you can be aligned with, connected with, and share and learn from. And that's really what it's about at the end of the day. So hopefully, as we work through this, that framework is in the back of your mind. And I just feel like it's a nice place to start with. By the way, we can do questions at the end if you want to ask questions, but also feel free to like interject at any point if you want to ask about something that I'm talking about or discussing. Like, don't be shy. I'm happy to take questions as we go. So just in terms of like what we're going to cover and the things we're going to talk about tonight. So we're going to talk about first of all, the value of networking. Like, why is it something that you want to do to begin with? We're also going to talk about, and I'm going to show you some key resources to help you build your network, because I think one of the main questions that we all get in the Career Center is, networking sounds like a good idea in theory, but like, how do I find people to network with? How do I find professionals, and how do I reach out to them? Which sort of leads us to the kind of third key thing we're going to talk about, which is again another, I think, major question that we get from students, and a lot of and one of the main things we talk about, which is like, okay, I found somebody that I want to reach out to and maybe start to build a professional relationship with, but I don't really know what to say. I don't know how to jumpstart that conversation. So we'll talk about some best practices and tips for how to do that. Sound good? Cool. And like I said, if you have questions about stuff that doesn't fall into those categories, by all means, interject, ask. We can tackle it at the end, whatever you need. So starting with the value of networking. So I'm going to kind of bring up some images here just to really drive home the point that, for one, all of you as RISD students, the RISD alumni community is almost already a part of your network, whether you know it or not. You maybe haven't like activated it yet, but anybody who's graduated from this institution, you're going to share that commonality with them. You're going to share that with them. And these are all people that you have that shared connection with. And it's kind of cool to think sometimes about like just the range and kind of impressive alumni that come from this place. People like notable fashion designer Nicole Miller, amazing painting, printmaking and installation artists like Carol Walker, literally the founder of the glass department at RISD, Dale Chihuly, and kind of one of the pioneering glass artists just in general. An amazing, conceptual artist like Jenny Holzer, graduated from painting in 1977. Just kind of further examples, kind of moving a little bit further forward into the future. Mar Figueroa, who started off her post-RISD career doing a lot of freelance illustration and has since kind of pivoted to be a little bit more of a fine artist, painter, and illustrator. A lot of people know Joe Gebbia as a co-founder of amazing tech company Airbnb. Yulitza Jean Charles, who founded Healthy Roots Dolls, which is an amazing toy company geared at young children of color. It does amazing work. And the idea for that actually started here at RISD in one of her illustration classes, which is a very cool thing. And then noted, street artist, Shepard Fairey, who a lot of people know for the Obama Hope poster, amongst many other things. So, I do this because it's just fun sometimes to be reminded of the cool people that have graduated from this institution, but also, again, just as a reminder that in theory, you share something with all of these amazing artists and designers, and reaching out to them and adding them to your network, is absolutely something that you can do. And doesn't have to be these 8 people necessarily, but just keep that in mind, that the RISD alumni community is a part of your network. And in some ways, it's just on you to kind of activate it in the way that you want to. And we'll talk about like how you can do that, but I think it's just a good reminder. So we talked about the RISD alumni community a little bit, but I want to pivot a bit and just speak more about this idea of the value of networking. There's many reasons to network, but one of the helpful reasons to network is that it can be very, very helpful in terms of finding work, in terms of getting jobs and getting internships. So to kind of illustrate that point, I want to just like, do a little kind of quick exercise here, a little activity. And that's to simply ask the question, what do you think is the percentage of jobs that are found via networking and referrals? Does anybody think it's 25%? No hands. What about 50%? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The real answer, according to this survey, 85%. And this survey was essentially an Adler, so there's a research group called the Adler Group that surveyed 3,000 people who had recently been hired and asked them, like, what was the way that you found your most recent position? And 85% of those respondents said it was via networking or some form of personal referral. So I show this. Now, I've seen like different versions of surveys like this, and the number's not always quite as high as 85, but it is usually pretty high. It's usually well over 50%. So I just want you to keep this in mind, because a lot of people, when they think about job searching or finding work, the thing they think about is like going on LinkedIn Jobs and looking for opportunities, or going on Indeed, or going to a company website and seeing what job openings they have and applying. And that is a good thing to do. It's not that that is not what you should be doing. That is absolutely a pathway to find work. But if you're only doing that, that's the only part of the job search that you're doing, you're kind of leaving out like a huge chunk of how people are successfully finding work. So I think it's a really good thing to keep in mind in terms of like, why do you invest time in building a network and building professional relationships? If if your goal is to find internships or jobs, this can be a big reason why it's worth the investment of time. Beyond the, utility of networking as a way to find jobs, I also want to just kind of like drill down on that a little bit and explain how it can be helpful. So like I said before, I think of like networking as like finding your people. It's a way to find like a support group of like-minded professionals. Those people in your network, those connections, they essentially give you an advantage as you navigate your career from like this point as a student, and 5 years from now, 10 years from now, moving forward. A network is a thing that you'll carry with you throughout your whole life. But they give you an advantage when you encounter different challenges. The advantage is kind of like in 2 main areas, maybe not just these 2, but I would kind of categorize them in these 2 areas. So one of those advantages is by accessing your network and learning from professionals in your network, you have an advantage in relevant knowledge. So what I mean by that is like an example like this. If you are speaking to professionals in the field that you want to work in and learning from them, you can ask them questions like, for example, what kind of work do you want to see in a portfolio when you are hiring people for an entry-level graphic design job, right? Whatever it may be. And that person's knowledge and expertise can then help you create a better portfolio, which then helps you be a better applicant, right? So by getting that kind of inside information, by tapping into your network, you're gaining an advantage in relevant knowledge that kind of seeps its way into all the things that you will do as an applicant and as a candidate. The other side of this too is that if you're building a network and activating it and using it consistently, it also might give you an advantage in access to opportunity. So what I mean by that is essentially the idea that, yeah, a lot of jobs are posted online, and a lot of times you can find those opportunities, like I said, on LinkedIn Jobs, on Indeed, on a company's website, but not always. And sometimes companies hire through word of mouth. Sometimes companies kind of put feelers out to their network before they make a position public. And unless you are tapped into that, unless you have connections or unless you have relationships with people at those companies or people in the industry, you may not know about that opportunity. It might just, go by you as, something that you never heard of. And so I think that that's what I mean when I say an advantage in access to opportunity. It's being aware of opportunities that either you might not have known about, or at least you may become aware of them sooner than other people and be able to act on them quicker. When we talk about networking, I think it's also helpful to kind of have it as a framework of learning and sharing. And I'll just kind of illustrate what I mean by that. So, and this is kind of, go back. This is kind of what I was talking about before in terms of relevant knowledge, access to relevant knowledge. And these are just, these questions are essentially sort of more examples of that. So I'm going to sort of divide this up by, questions that might ask design professionals versus questions that you might ask those who work in fine art. Those lines blur. That doesn't mean that you have to have a certain set of questions that you ask if you're networking with people in design, and you have to have a separate set of questions that you ask for those working in fine art. But it's helpful to just kind of break it down in this way just to make it understandable. So again, if you are networking, learning from individuals and professionals that are maybe a little bit more experienced than you and kind of offer insight that you don't have, you can ask them questions like this. You can ask them questions like, what types of projects do designers work on in your studio? What skills are most valuable for designers to have at your company? This is one I mentioned before, but what tips do you have for creating a portfolio in the blank industry, whatever industry you might be pursuing work in? And then I kind of like this one too, and this works across like design, fine art, you name it. But what do you wish, if you could transport back to, the year you graduated or whatever the case may be, what do you wish you knew when you were starting out? Like, what would be your advice to your past self? Because if you're in that position now, you can kind of take advantage of whatever advice they're giving you. So these are some examples of how, asking the right questions in these types of networking conversations can really lend you some of that relevant knowledge we were talking about. Flip it. And again, the lines blur here, so you could ask questions on both sides here. But for fine art, you might be, speaking with a gallery director or somebody who works in the gallery business, and you might say, what do you look for in the artists that you show or represent? What are the qualities, both in the artist, the person, as well as the work? If maybe you're talking with somebody who runs a artist grant program or an artist residency, you could ask them, what qualities make for a strong grant and residency application? And what are the things that I should be doing when I apply to those types of things? More general, like what advice do you have for an emerging artist, somebody who's at my stage of my career? Or what are the most important things that I should be doing to support my career path as a fine artist? Kind of, again, making it more broad and opening it up to allow them to kind of point you in directions you might not have expected. The other big piece of advice I would offer to make this all a lot more manageable would be to develop a networking strategy. And so basically what that means, or what I would recommend, is make a plan and schedule how you're going to network over time so that it becomes easy. You chunk it up, you make sure that you're sort of like accountable to yourself to stay on top of this and continually build your network over a period of time, instead of having to like crunch all your networking activity all at once, which is gonna just burn you out. So what might that look like? So as you can kind of see on the right-hand side here, one of the things you might start to do is maintain a list of your favorite studios, artists, cultural institutions, nonprofit organizations, whatever your interests are. Start to sort of like look outside the RISD bubble, see who's doing work that you admire, and start to think about like, okay, first of all, I want to sort of organize my list of places that are doing work that I like. And then also these can be places that you sort of target to sort of build a network within. So in the case of what you're seeing on the screen there, this is obviously a small list. They're kind of just starting, but they're really interested in tech, right? And, whether it's kind of traditional tech companies like Microsoft or Amazon, or more financial tech or health and tech companies like Virgin Pulse and Capital One. But that's the area they're sort of focused on. And then, like I said, you'd want to set aside time every month to sort of dig into that list, and maybe add more organizations to your list, but more importantly than that, start to find networking contacts that you think would be ideal for you to reach out to. So that's what you're seeing kind of in the column C there, where they've identified, in some cases, RISD alumni who are working at those places. In other cases, recruiters or talent acquisition professionals that are working in those organizations, or like, managers, design leads, that kind of a thing. The other thing I'll make, this is a small detail, but you'll see in the last column there, they have like a notes and next steps. It's just helpful to kind of, again, keep track. If you have like a lot of companies or organizations that you're looking at, you might kind of forget what was the last, where did we leave off? What was the last contact I had with them? So just keeping track of that in terms of a notes and next steps can also be useful. Later on, we're going to break down, because I think probably looking at this, one of the questions might be like, okay, this is cool, but how do I actually find people that are affiliated with these organizations? Like, how do I find the networking connections? And we'll do a deeper dive into that. But obviously that's a key part of this process as well. And then one last thing, actually, I think there's maybe 2 more points, but one other thing is of course you want to be reaching out to new contacts and building and growing your network in that way, but also be sure to maintain and keep up contacts with people you've already reached out to. That doesn't necessarily have to be monthly, but you might think about like every semester or so, like trying to reach back out to people. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah. So I think so the question was, is it okay essentially to reach back out to somebody that you've kind of lost touch with, or it's been a couple of years? I think the answer is absolutely. And you kind of, in a way, you sort of answered a part of that yourself, which is that like when you reach out, part of your excuse can be like, hey, some time's gone by, but here's what's new with me. I'd love to update you with what's going on with me. Here are some of the exciting projects or some of the things I'm doing. You're in FAV, I think, right? Yeah. So you could like update them if, I don't know what track you're on, but you could talk to them about some of the either live action or animation projects that you've been working on, as a way to bring them up to speed. And then you might also, just think about like, okay, I'm reaching out, I'm sharing an update, but also like, what's my ask of them, right? Do I want their feedback on one of my projects? Would I like them to give me perspective on, the place that they're working at? There's no perfect answer, but you might want to think about like, aside from just providing the update, is there something else I want to ask of them, or way to kind of engage them in conversation? So we'll talk about that a little more, but it's a really good question. So, like I said, there's kind of this like framework of like, okay, I start to develop a plan, kind of map out a strategy, start to think about organizations or designers or artists that I want to, cultivate and add to my network. But I think a lot of times where people get tripped up is like, that's all good in theory, but like, how do I actually put this into practice? Like, where do I find these individuals and how do you actually make this happen? So I want to share some tools that you can use for networking and just kind of demo how they can be helpful. There's 4 on here. This is not an exhaustive list, right? So there's like many, many, many ways people can network. And one thing that I didn't necessarily say at the outset, but I think is worth saying, is that like, there's no one perfect way to network, or there's not one tool that's better than the other necessarily. It really kind of comes back to your own personal style. What kind of industries or professional worlds are you hoping to enter? What are some common tools or places that those individuals can be found? And then you kind of map out the plan that works best for your goals. So these tools are, I think, helpful, and that's why I'm going to share them with you. But there might be things that you find out there in the world that are better suited for you and your goals, and that's okay. I'm going to start with LinkedIn, which a lot of people know of. But one of the things that we hear frequently in advising meetings or just feedback from students is that like, okay, maybe I have a LinkedIn, like I know what LinkedIn's about, but I don't really know how to effectively use it, at least in terms as a networking tool, So if people are brave enough, like who has a LinkedIn profile? Most of the crew. Who feels pretty confident that they're using it to its full extent? in terms of like being able to reach out and network with people, like a handful. So that's good, and you very well may be. Hopefully, you know, for the rest of the crew, there's some things in here that might be helpful in terms of how to fully activate this tool. It's not a perfect tool, it's not a perfect platform, but as a networking tool, it's pretty good. And there's some features that can be really useful. Just by way of kind of explaining a little bit of the core features for those that are kind of uninitiated. Big thing, which seems like a lot of you know about already, you can create a professional profile and sort of professional identity, so to speak, on LinkedIn. This, I think, you know, the next few bullets are maybe sort of the underrated parts of it. It's a great tool to research creative industries and career paths. And I'll show you this. It's really, really good in terms of being able to network within companies, studios, and organizations. So like most people know the first bullet point and kind of get that. Not as many people activate kind of bullet points 2 and 3, which we'll dive into a little bit. So just another kind of point in the column of like why using LinkedIn can be useful or helpful, just from a pure numbers and stats perspective. So this is actually probably dated at this point, but there's at least 700 plus million members that are on LinkedIn in across the globe in 200 plus countries, which you're kind of seeing in the graphic there. So I do think that's important to note because, you know, RISD is obviously a US-based institution, and many of you may be seeking work in the United States, but maybe not exclusively. And so this is helpful to kind of know that LinkedIn is truly an international and global network. And so regardless of either where you're from or where you may be seeking work in the future, there's probably, you know, a good chance that LinkedIn could be useful in terms of building your network in that region and place. There's over 50 million companies that use LinkedIn and have a LinkedIn company page, which I'll show you a little bit, which is impressive and kind of just shows you from in terms of organizations that hire, how much it's utilized. 74% of users surveyed said that LinkedIn helped them in researching people and companies. So I do think for those who are using the platform effectively, they do find use, especially in terms of being able to find people and learn more about the organizations they're looking to work in. And this one's kind of like a mind-blowing, not surprising necessarily, but like a mind-blowing stat. 94% of recruiters are active on LinkedIn. So again, back to this idea of like, if you're on LinkedIn and part of your goal is that it'll help you get hired, there's good evidence that people who are involved in the hiring process are using this platform. And so it's a good place to be. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the profile itself, but I do want to do a quick run through of it. And we'll touch on some of like the key sections. So we'll go through and talk a little bit about the tagline and summary. We'll talk about the featured work section, which I'll show you. A lot of people don't fully use that. Experience, common section that a lot of people will be familiar with from a resume. Endorsements and skills, which is something that is very useful and again, maybe a little underutilized. And recommendations, which I'm pretty sure most people also underutilize a little bit. The way we'll do this is I'll actually pull up in a minute and we'll kind of scroll through the profile of Nick Cole, who is a graduate from RISD 09 illustration, and actually just recently confirmed that Nick is going to be in April giving a talk for us about freelancing. So Nick was a longtime freelancer for 10 years doing character design and illustration work, freelanced for like Netflix, I think Riot Games, Disney, like a whole impressive range of places. So if you're considering freelancing, Nick's talk will be super useful, but his profile is pretty good as well. And we're gonna take a look at it right now. So I mentioned the tagline. I think Nick does a pretty good job here. It's, you know, straightforward, just leaning into I'm a character designer and illustrator, but he's also got his images of his work, which I think is a good thing to have. The about section, this is basically about personalizing you a little bit, but also highlighting some of your core skill sets. So he mentions like being able to do character design and other things. The featured work section here, this is a section that I think is underutilized. So you can think about this as highlighting some portfolio images. You don't have to add your whole portfolio there, but it's a great way to showcase creative work. The other way you can do this, which you're kind of seeing as we scroll through Nick's profile, so you have the experience section, which functions much like, a resume experience section, but there is the cool opportunity to highlight work embedded within experiences as well, which not a lot of people take advantage of. So I would do that. The skills section, one key thing about that is you control the top 3 skills that you highlight on LinkedIn. By default, it will do endorsements. It will highlight it by endorsements, meaning like if more people endorse you for a skill, it's going to show up in your top 3, but you don't have to set it up as that. You can adjust that if you want to. So I wanted to throw that out there, that like those top 3 skills that you highlight are really, really important in terms of kind of defining what you're good at. One of the things that we kind of scrolled past there real quick in my video was a little too fast, but I'll just talk about it. And you can always go and look at Nick's profile to kind of see this deeper. There's also a recommendation feature on LinkedIn. Does anybody know about this? Okay, so this is a really cool tool. So essentially what you can do is if you've worked for anybody, so if you've ever had an internship before, or it doesn't even have to be art and design related necessarily, but if you've ever worked for somebody and that individual or your supervisor at that internship, let's say, is on LinkedIn, you can actually request, you can just literally through LinkedIn, request that they write a recommendation for you. And it doesn't have to be like, I'm not talking like a full page recommendation. This can be just like a short paragraph, but it's a really nice feature because then when somebody's on your profile, not only are they seeing your past experience, but if they scroll down to that recommendation feature and you have some recommendations, they're literally hearing from somebody who worked with you before to talk positively about what it was like to work with you, what assets you brought to the table, why you were, a helpful and effective employee, which is a really cool thing. And you can't really do that on a traditional resume. So it's a very cool feature that LinkedIn offers. And like Nick in his profile, he's got like 20 recommendations. You don't have to go that crazy. He's, like I said, freelance for 10 plus years. He's got a lot of experience. But if you can get 1 or 2 that show your value and kind of add a little bit of context to your past work experiences, that can be a really valuable thing. So I know we kind of cruised through that really quick. You can always come to the office and get a second opinion on your LinkedIn profile, and we can do a deeper dive into the specific sections if you want. Moving on from the profile, I want to highlight another feature about LinkedIn that I think is maybe a little bit underutilized. So, excuse me. So on LinkedIn, basically any college you can think of is able to have its own school page. And so RISD has its own school page. And there's a lot of different content on there. And like RISD uses it, for example, as one way to like share jobs and opportunities at RISD. But one of the cooler features is that it's actually a way for you to kind of look into and discover alumni in a really cool way. You can see popular geographic locations that alumni are working. You can find companies that they're working at. And you can also kind of search within majors to kind of dig deeper and make it kind of specific to what you're studying. So I'll show you what that looks like. So if you just type in Rhode Island School of Design, you can easily find the school page. And then if you click on alumni, that tab there, it brings you to this. And one of the things that you can do is, as you're going to see in a second, you can go to this section where it asks, what did the alumni study? And you can essentially see a list of the RISD majors, and you could choose, if let's say in this instance, I'm an ID major, you can choose it. And now it's only going to show me the 3,000 plus RISD alumni that studied ID. Also is showing me what are some popular companies that they work at. And then if I scroll further down, it's actually giving me profile previews, essentially, of the ID alums. I can even take this a step further and narrow it by region. So let's just say I'm from San Fran or I want to work in the Bay Area. I can add that layer to the search, see where those ID alums in San Francisco are working, and again, see kind of previews of profiles of those people, ID alums working and living in San Fran. If any of these, kind of piqued my interest, I could definitely click on them learn more about them and explore their profile, which we're not going to do like a deep dive into Sophia's profile, but that's how easy it is. If I wanted to like learn more about that person and potentially connect with them, I've done like 3 clicks and I've already found an alum working at a really cool institution like Smart Design, and potentially that's somebody that I can reach out to and add to my network. So I think the Rhode Island School of Design school feature, and then the alumni feature within that is a really potent tool that not a lot of people utilize. Another really useful thing on LinkedIn is the RISD LinkedIn alumni group. So this is a group that has over 10,000 plus of RISD alumni in this group, which represents roughly 1/3 of all of the RISD alumni that are living in the world. So it's actually pretty cool that there's just like one group online where 1/3 of all the alumni in the world are sort of congregated and you can access. And this can be a good way to explore the members in that group, learn about opportunities. The other cool thing about groups on LinkedIn is that when you join a group, all the members of that group kind of instantaneously become a part of your network. They're going to show up in all of your searches, and they essentially become like first-degree connections at that point. So it's really, joining groups is a really useful tool as a way to like make LinkedIn more effective for you, and make your searches on LinkedIn more effective. And all it takes is like 1 click. Like in this case, you join the group, you've got kind of 10,000 people added to your LinkedIn network essentially, which is pretty impressive. So just again, to kind of demo what this looks like I said, 10,000 plus members. This is sort of what the group looks like on LinkedIn. And as you scroll down, you're able to see that people, just like most online communities, are posting opportunities, sharing advice, like just this example of alum Kendra Kirchmer, who's an assistant professor and furniture designer, who's sharing this opportunity and basically saying like, love it if a RISD person could join me at Kansas State, go in, check their profile, learn more about them, learn more about their experience, sort of what brought them to, to founding their own studio, as well as becoming a professor. This is just like a point that I think is worth noting, that so I haven't, in what I've shown you so far, I haven't even reached out to anybody yet, right? I've just kind of used this as like a research tool. And of course you can reach out and connect to people, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But one thing I really like about LinkedIn is just in like a really passive way, you can see career paths like in real time, because when you go to somebody's profile, you're able to see not only what they're currently doing, but what were the steps that they took to get there, which I think is really, really helpful, really at all stages of your development. But I think especially when you're in college, when you're kind of thinking about like, okay, maybe I have a goal, like I want to be an art director, for example, but I don't know exactly how to get there. Well, guess what? You've got a tool like LinkedIn where you can find art directors and see how they got there. And that's not to say you have to copy their career path, but it gives you a roadmap and it gives you some ideas. Or if I wanted to be a professor, I could kind of see what Kendra Kirchmer did. So that's another like low key, really useful thing about LinkedIn that I just wanted to plug real quick. So we've kind of talked about using the RISD school page to kind of explore alumni in a cool kind of dynamic graphic way. We've talked about using the LinkedIn group as a way to grow your alumni networking connections, as well as maybe even find opportunities or find alums to network with. I want to shift a little bit now to talking about how you can network kind of within studios or within companies on LinkedIn. And to just kind of tie this together, remember back to when we were looking at like the Google sheet and we were saying to ourselves like, okay, I'm going to build a networking plan. I'm going to start to map out places that I would love to learn more about or build connections with. This is kind of the tie into that, right? Because this is how I can maybe start to find individuals that I can network with within that organization. So I'll show you how to do that. We're going to use Gensler, which is like a major architecture firm, as an example. I'm on LinkedIn. I can literally just type the name of the company in the search bar. It'll come back. They have a company page, which, like I said, 50 million companies do. I can go to their company page. There's a lot of good content on here, so you can learn more about the company. You can see if they have jobs posted. but we're going to focus on the people. So this people tab, it's going to look familiar. It looks similar to what we were looking at with the RISD page. But for this, we're going to reverse engineer it. We're going to say, I want to see the people at Gensler who studied at RISD, who graduated at RISD. Now, instead of looking at 6,000 people, I'm looking at the 57 who graduated from RISD who worked there. And same as that other page, I can begin to kind of scroll through and see what their roles are, and just kind of get a flavor for what people are doing. But if anybody struck my interests, and maybe it's like, oh, a design strategist works at Gensler, that's an interesting title. Let me dig into that and see Allison's profile. Again, similar to what we were doing with Kendra, I can look into the path that brought them there and learn more about their role. I could go to their contact info on that page and go to their website and see their portfolio projects, learn more about what they're doing as a design strategist. And of course, I could reach out and introduce myself. And I know I've said that a couple times and I haven't gotten to that, like we're going to reach out and actually introduce ourselves to these people. We will. I'm going to save kind of like the reach out part to the end. So just like know that we are going to talk about that. But I wanted to focus this part on like how this tool can be useful in terms of like finding the people you want to network with. And then we'll get to sort of like, okay, I've decided I want to reach out to these individuals. What do I do? So far, in terms of like LinkedIn, that was a little bit of a crash course, but is that making sense? Useful? Is some of that like new to people in terms of like how to use the platform? Okay, you might have seen some of it or done some of it, but cool. Awesome. So who here knows that RISD has alumni groups? So like RISD as an institution has like set up alumni groups that alumni, once you graduate, can join and sort of like be active and engaged with, but also students while you're here can sort of connect with as well. Who knows this? A couple people. Yeah, but it's not like always widely known. And I think it's worth really knowing about and activating because it can also be another way to really build that network. So to kind of illustrate this and break it down a little bit. So RISD as an institution supports these alumni groups, and they're usually kind of divided up into kind of two main categories. They're either kind of based on geographic region, so like alumni who live in a certain place, or industry affinity, or people who are working in or passionate about the same professional work. There's about 20 plus industry related groups and 30 regional or geographic groups. So this is another important but maybe somewhat underutilized way for you to connect with alums, learn from their experience, and also explore the sort of industries and career paths that they work in. So I have the link up there in case you want to check this out and explore this. You can find information on the groups at the alumni website, which is this alumni.risd.edu. But I'm going to show you, I'm going to demo for you real quick, like what this might look like. So if you're at the alumni website, you can hop over and click on that Connect tab. And then you kind of have the choice. Do you want to look at regional clubs or affinity groups? For this demo, we're going to do affinity groups. And I just do want to kind of just show you the range here. It's actually really cool. And these are growing all the time. So we've got, animation, fashion, film, VR, AR, painters, photographers, those who work in social impact, architects, RISD Asian alumni, RISD Black alumni, educators, queer alumni, even RISD lawyers, right? Like who would have thought, like RISD grads who then go on to law school. We're going to focus on RISD women in business because I just think it's a cool example. So maybe you want to start your own studio one day and you want to connect with others who've done the same thing. This is a great tool. And what I would recommend is starting with who's the group leadership. So for all of these clubs, there are alumni who sort of like volunteer to run and manage these clubs. And those are really, really, really good targets in terms of people that you might reach out to and start to forge a connection with, because they're sort of already saying that that's something like they want to do, right? By volunteering and being a part of these clubs, they're kind of acknowledging that they're game to network and game to share advice. So as a student, they're really, really good people to consider reaching out to, especially if you've identified the specific affinity group that kind of aligns with your goals. And now that we've gone through LinkedIn, you kind of know how easy it is. Like once you have a name, you just hop over to LinkedIn and see if you can find them that way. You might also be able to, find them, find their email or find their website. There's lots of different options, but you should be able to kind of track them down and kind of forge or start a conversation. Going to move over to Instagram as another kind of key networking tool and another social media platform. So obviously a lot of people are on Instagram, know what it's about. I do think it's kind of wild to be reminded that it has like the 4th most users of any mobile application, not just like social media, but just like any mobile app, which is kind of bonkers. So there's obviously a lot of people on it, kind of similar to LinkedIn. It's well used. Art directors, curators, people who are kind of in the business of hiring artists and designers or working with artists and designers really, really love Instagram as a way to find talent and connect with people. So kind of like the same idea we were talking about with LinkedIn, where 94% of recruiters are on LinkedIn, a lot of art directors and curators really use Instagram almost as like a kind of talent scouting tool. The other thing I like about Instagram is that it's essentially like free marketing. So it's a way for you to promote your work, to share what's unique about what you do creatively. And if you like hashtag effectively, it can be a way for people to find your work organically, just kind of come across it without even knowing who you are and what you do. I'll just kind of show an example of this, but I'm a big believer in social media and Instagram specifically as a way to provide a deeper view into your process. So what I mean by that is like you all have or will have a portfolio. That's a great way to show your work, and you might show process on it too, but there's opportunities with social media and Instagram for you to really, really bring people into the process of how you make by kind of showing them what it's like in your studio, doing kind of quick little videos that show like laser cutting or whatever it may be, that like you might not be able to do in the same way in a portfolio, but allows people to really access the way that you make in a way that feels like personal and cool. And I'm sure a lot of you, like you might follow artists and designers who do that. And it is like, it's awesome. It gives you a greater appreciation for what they do and how they do it. And you can do the same thing. And I think it brings people into you as a maker. Just some like key tips in terms of networking, how you can kind of think about this. So you might have picked up, I'm kind of a big fan on developing plans. So develop a plan for how you want to use any social media, but we'll focus on Instagram for the purposes of this. So what might that plan include? So for one, you don't just want to think about what you are putting out in the world on Instagram and what you're posting, but you also want to think about who you're following and sort of like what your Instagram community is like. And so I kind of say follow the right people, but that really just depends on you. So if you're a fine artist, that might mean following galleries and curators and gallery directors. If you're an interior designer, if you're like a furniture designer, that might mean following interior designers who might be able to like place your pieces in people's homes or in hospitality projects that they're a part of, etc. If you're an illustrator, maybe it's following art directors who hire editorial illustrators. If you're a director or film editor, maybe it's following production companies. So you get the idea. It's about being kind of strategic in who your community is. And like, of course, your community is going to be your friends and, the people that you share studio with here. And that's fine. That should be a part of it. But also you want to maybe, again, kind of get outside of that RISD bubble and kind of start to grow it and make it more professional too. I think this is so this kind of follows on actually to the last thought, which is, so you want to think about following entities that relate to your work, but then you also want to engage with them. So lots of different ways to do that. You want to like their content, comment on it, maybe even DM them, but definitely I think the commenting piece of this is really important, because if you comment and appreciate what they're doing, they're probably going to reciprocate that. And that might be a way for them to really notice you. If you comment on what they're doing, they might take a look at your profile and be super impressed at your talent. And then all of a sudden, that's the beginning of a networking connection that you've developed. But it didn't happen unless you sort of took that first step and engaged with them. So just, put yourself out there a little bit and appreciate what others are doing, because it usually is reciprocated. So I mentioned the hashtagging thing. So this is a thing that, in terms of like growing your network and helping people discover your work organically, this is helpful. So, there's no perfect hashtags to use necessarily, because again, this is personalized and it kind of depends on the work that you make. But my advice on this is look at what other artists, designers, and makers, especially those that seem to, use Instagram significantly and have a significant following, look at how they're posting, look at what hashtags they're using, and kind of explore those hashtags in terms of like, their reach, in terms of how many people use that hashtag. One thing to keep in mind is like, you ideally might want to find the sweet spot of like, it's not a totally obscure hashtag that nobody uses, because that's not really going to help you get views. But also just going by like, oh, there's millions of people who use this or millions of posts that use this hashtag. That might be oversaturated. Your work might get lost in the shuffle there. So sometimes you want to find the happy medium of like, it's well used, it's acknowledged by people in the industry, but it's not oversaturated. So just keep that in mind. Like I said, kind of to the point of planning, develop a posting schedule, at least again, so that it's like, it doesn't have to be like, I'm going to do it every week necessarily, but you want to be consistent. You want to keep your Instagram alive. You want to keep it so that people are engaged with it and you're showing up on their feed on a regular basis. So it doesn't like, do it regularly, keep a schedule so it doesn't like die and sort of like wither on the vine. And then this is kind of back to the idea of like showing process. I think Instagram and social media is a really cool opportunity to show a more personal side of who you are and what you do in a way that like a portfolio, you can't always quite do it. So I had mentioned Mar Figueroa before, and I'm going to bring up their Instagram here. And so when you look at Mar's Instagram, you can kind of see a nice range. I know it's a little bit small here, but you can kind of see a nice range in that there are examples of actual work. So it is a great way to see actual pieces. But then there are either reels or videos or photos that are more personal, that are more working in the studio, or in the case of this one that I'm highlighting, they got a new studio and they're showing it off and they're kind of like showing their environment and excited to be in this space. So, you don't have to, do something where you're like, oh, I got this new studio and I want to show it to everybody. But it's essentially like providing the glimpse, providing the window into how you make, where you make, what tools you use, et cetera, what makes your creative process unique. I think people gravitate towards that. And that's something that they can't always find on your website, on a portfolio, et cetera. So I think this is a cool way to mix it up and get people excited. I want to highlight professional associations. So this is, again, another way to like find people, because I think that this can be something that a lot of people aren't aware of, but these are sort of like, I call them hubs, or they're sort of like gold mines in terms of potentially finding a network and building your network. So especially for those that kind of may not know what I'm referring to, professional association is basically just an organization that is created to support professionals that are working in a specific industry. So the image on the right there is kind of showing you an example. It's actually pretty cool. There's an organization called Climate Designers, which is literally an organization to support designers and creative people that want to apply their skills to sustainability and challenges with climate change. So it's a good example. There's like pretty much a professional association for almost any area or topic you can think of. These are great ways to, again, further connect with other creatives that you align with, to learn about opportunities and resources that are relevant to that industry. And this is a way, LinkedIn is a way to do this too, but this is another way to sort of grow your creative community outside of RISD or outside of the RISD alumni base, because there's professionals from, that have graduated from all kinds of institutions that are a part of these groups. If you want, I'm going to show some examples, but if you want to find examples of these, we have a ton on our website in the internships and jobs. So if you go on the top nav and go to internships and jobs, on that page, we actually have them organized by major. So you can kind of click find your major, and on kind of the right-hand column, when you see it, there's a list per major of relevant professional associations that you can check out if you're unfamiliar. So I'm going to just jump ahead and show you this video actually of the Climate Designers website, just to show you like how robust these can be. So Climate Designers has this section, which is literally profiles of people that are a part of the organization. And you can actually search by like skills. So you can search by these individuals are working and utilizing their creative skills in these areas to work on projects related to climate change and sustainability. So it's actually kind of amazing that they've created this, but a lot of professional associations have directories or kind of profile sections like this. And they can be ways to explore and learn about people. And I'm just kind of showing you like the example of Charlene's profile here. You can even see projects they're working on, learn more about what they're doing, go to their website and LinkedIn, which are linked here if you wanted to. We won't do that, but you can kind of see really quickly how these types of organizations can really help you grow and expand your network. You also can, kind of like the RISD regional groups, Climate Designers has these local chapters. So for designers who are working on climate issues in all of these different regions around the world, you can click and go specifically to that chapter and connect with individuals who are in that region. So if you know that there are places that you want to work or you're already there, you can sort of build a community that way. They also have this section, which they've entitled Learn, but it's basically this cool guide, which is like for people who are new to kind of climate design. What is climate design? What can you do as a climate designer? How do you start your career in this world? And it's like this step-by-step guide that's been created. And in fact, kind of cool tie-in, the author of this is Aidan Hudson-Lepore, who's a RISD alum and a member of this group. And so, oh, it's linked. Maybe I can go check out Aidan's website. This will take a minute to load, which I apologize. The video kind of like went static on me here. But I could learn more about it, Aidan's career, the things they're doing, where they're working, and potentially reach out. So you kind of saw in the span of like, 2 minutes there, how these professional associations can really provide value and be a window that can be really, really useful in growing your network. I'm going to scoot ahead in the interest of time here, or at least I'm going to try to. There we go. And just to kind of illustrate the huge range of organizations that you can find. So there's everything from organizations for architects, organizations for professional women in the arts, for craft artists, to BIPOC directors, interaction designers, children's book writers, queer artists, fashion designers. And this is like just a small subset of what's out there. So there really is, again, no matter what your interests are, pretty confident you'll be able to find a professional association that's like at least somewhat relevant to your interest. So we're heading to the end here. I know you've all been super patient and I know we're getting late. So I'm going to try to wrap this up in a reasonable amount of time. But the last part is an important part. And I know it's a question that a lot of people have. And that is, okay, this is all great. I've found these resources. I know how to find people I want to network with, but like, what do I actually say? Like, how do I start this conversation? So in terms of networking outreach, I'm just going to offer some tips in terms of like, how do you approach this? So when you're reaching out to somebody, whether it's, through a message on LinkedIn or it's through an email, whatever the kind of method, there's a couple of key things to keep in mind. So one thing is keep it short. So if you're reaching out to professionals, you got to keep in mind that they're probably pretty busy, like their day-to-day job in terms of whatever their creative work is, that's kind of priority. And they're not just sitting at their computer waiting for you to reach out to them, right? So that doesn't mean you can't do it or should be afraid to do it. It just means you want to make it accessible. You want to give them a message that they can understand and digest quickly. So you don't want to write a novel when you write to them. Basic kind of, content that you can include. Briefly introduce yourself and maybe explain how you learned about them. So that might be that you came across them on LinkedIn. Maybe you found them on Climate Designers or some other professional association. Maybe they're in a RISD alumni group, right? You can kind of see how there's multiple ways you might find people and multiple ways you might kind of mention it. I think this is important. Like, you want to connect with what they do. You want to express enthusiasm for what they do in like a meaningful and authentic way. So, that's just it's just kind of like good etiquette, right? If like you're reaching out to them and kind of like, especially coming out of the blue, it's not somebody that you know really well, you want to make sure that you spend some time to sort of like acknowledge that you are essentially a fan of what they do or what their company does, and that you connect with it and you find meaning in it. People appreciate that. The thing I think that's helpful to, especially as a student or a young professional, is you can kind of portray yourself in the message as an advice seeker, as somebody who's seeking to learn from their expertise or their wisdom or their experience. Especially if you're reaching out to somebody, which you is oftentimes the case, though not always, somebody that is a little older or a little bit more experienced than you. You can kind of position it as like, I'm hoping to learn from you. And then this is just this is kind of along the idea of keeping things accessible, but limit what you ask them to like one manageable minor thing. So what I mean by that is like, ideally, when you reach out, you don't want to include in that message, like, I'm hoping you'll give me a portfolio review. I'm hoping you'll tell me about internships at your organization. I'm hoping you'll, give me tips on what skills I need to develop. Like, you don't want to overwhelm them with like, tell me this, and this in that message, because that might cause them to be like, well, I don't know if I have time for this. Like, this is a lot. So just keep the initial ask minor, and you can kind of use it as like, I'm getting my foot in the door. I'm going to start a relationship with this person. And then over time, I can get answers to the questions that I have. This is just like, it does not have to look exactly like this, but this is an example. In this case, it's an email, but this is an example of like what a introductory email might look like. So in this case, just to kind of create the context. So this person, this sculpture student, is reaching out to Lynn, and Lynn is a director of creative placemaking at LISC, which stands for Local Initiative Support Coalition. It's basically an organization that works within cities to sort of like cultivate community programming, and they have a whole division that's on like creative placemaking, which is sort of like public art and similar kinds of things. Pretty cool organization, pretty cool work. So this sculpture student found them on LinkedIn, has their email, and is reaching out. So in this message, he writes, "Hi, Lynn. My name is Ramel, and I'm a senior at RISD studying sculpture. I came across your profile on LinkedIn, and it was so great to see that you are a graduate from RISD, working in the public art sector as the director of creative placemaking at LISC. Most of my professional or personal work involves creating interactive sculptural installations that engage the public and encourage a sense of community. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and I hope to continue doing after I graduate from RISD. I'd love to connect with you. I'm hoping that we can speak briefly sometime about creative placemaking and the work that you do at LISC. It is so inspiring to be able to find an alum working in a field that I'm excited about. I'd be so grateful to learn from you. Thanks, and looking forward to hear from you." So it's short, focused. We give some love and appreciation to the work that they're doing. We also are kind of one minor ask in this case is that, hey, it would be amazing if we could set aside some time to chat, like briefly chat, and love to just ask you questions about the work that you do. And that's it. That's the kind of focus of the message. And I think that is probably constructed in a way where there's enough context. The person has introduced themselves. They've kind of explained why they're reaching out, but they're not asking a ton, right? It's then on sort of Lynn at this point to sort of follow up and, carve out some time and say, yeah, I'd be happy to talk with you. Let's hop on the phone for 15 minutes or whatever it might be. So this, I think, is a pretty good model in terms of like what you can do for outreach. The kind of next step in this, right, is that ideally this kind of leads to a conversation. So I also do want to give some tips about that. So let's say in this scenario, Ramel was able to, schedule a phone or Zoom call or even an in-person meeting. And they want to think about how to kind of approach that. So this is helpful to keep these things in mind. So you want to have like what is called like an elevator pitch, which is just a fancy term for like having a tight, maybe like 60-second breakdown of like who you are and what you do, right? So that we kind of already had, excuse me, a little bit of that in the intro, but just think about, how would you define what it is that you do? What are you studying? What kinds of work are you producing? What kind of, environments or industries or applications for your work are you hoping to do professionally down the line? You don't have to have it all figured out, but try to give people an idea of, again, like the type of work that you do and how you envision applying it and what excites you about it. And maybe some core skills or core abilities that you have that you think are somewhat unique to you. It'll just help people understand who you are, and you'll come across as like really professional and kind of polished. This is important. So when you go into this conversation, you want to come ready with some questions for them. So essentially, you've made the outreach, you've kind of said like, oh, you're somebody that I would like to learn from. So think about like, what do I want to learn? What can I learn from this person? What are some questions that I can ask them? And again, there's not necessarily any right answer to that or no, specific perfect question, but you can kind of take this as an opportunity to sort of say, okay, this person works in this role and is in this position. What insight can I get from them that I maybe can't get from my professors? I can't get even from career advisors because they have a specific lived experience and I want to kind of learn from that lived experience. So kind of think about what could you ask them uniquely that is specific to their role, their life experience, the work that they do. That might help you generate some questions. You want to be prepared to show your work. And again, like, I don't know that you want to go into this thinking like, oh, this will be a portfolio review, because that's sort of like, in most cases, that's not maybe what you've asked for, but you do want to be ready to show your work in case they might ask. The conversation might gravitate towards that. They might be really excited to hear what you do. They might think, oh, there might even be a connection between what I do and what you do creatively. Like, I'd love to see your work. And then if you're ready to show it, you're sort of prepared to kind of see where that conversation leads, and it could lead to some really good places. I think kind of two things in terms of like thinking about the end of the conversation. Be sure to ask if it would be okay to follow up with them. So this is part of how you keep these connections lasting and how you keep these connections alive over time, is that especially if you've made a good connection in that conversation, it's not just about that one conversation. You want to make it where this is somebody that you can come back to, ask questions of in the future, check in with periodically. And who knows, this is also maybe the beginnings of a mentorship, not always, but it can be. And so that's another way to kind of think about this, is if this is somebody that you can repeatedly come back to and get advice from, that's how mentorships develop in a lot of cases. So try to be conscious of leading this beyond just the one conversation. And this is also useful too. So that person has experience and they work in that given industry and have worked in that industry for some time in most cases. So they have connections, right? That person has a network. And so I think that's really useful to keep in mind, because asking if they have suggestions based upon your work and your interests for people or organizations that you could also connect with and learn from, essentially what you're doing is kind of like tapping into their network and allowing them to kind of make suggestions and maybe even make introductions if they feel comfortable doing that. So that's another thing that you can add to this that a lot of professionals will be happy to do. So to kind of wrap this up, wrap this up and recap. Some parting advice for. So, I'm big on plans, but I would think about like developing a networking plan, thinking back to that spreadsheet that we saw. You don't have to create a spreadsheet if you hate spreadsheets, but develop some kind of plan and tracking mechanism so that you can break this up and manage it over time and just make it easy and not, feel like it's something you have to do all at once. Find your networking hubs. Find the places where your people, where your, the creatives you align with, the artists and designers you admire, find where they're congregating. And that there's a lot of different examples of that, but I think the professional associations in particular might be a good way to kind of find those hubs. Be fearless. I think another thing to keep in mind with networking, not everybody is going to respond. I'll just straight up tell you that. Like you might reach out to some people and they may not get back to you. And that's a bummer. And sometimes like the instinct is to take that personal, but you got to kind of push through that. And you got to focus on, it's quality over quantity. It's not like how many contacts do I have or, you know, how many people get back to me. It's more about the quality of the connections that you develop and the meaning of those conversations and how they can have value to you, both in terms of just your, like I said before, your relevant knowledge and also access to opportunity. So don't get, you know, don't get beat down or don't get too distraught if not everybody you reach out to responds. That's okay. It's still worth doing. Then last thing is just be yourself. And there's a lot of ways you can interpret that, but I think I've shown you a lot of things. I've shown you a lot of resources, given you an idea of how you could plan this for yourself. But at the end of the day, like, make networking work for you. Do it in the way that makes sense for you. Take it in chunks that are manageable for you. Again, like, don't compare yourself to like, oh, my friend like has 500 connections on LinkedIn and I only have 100. Like, don't make it a competition or anything like that. Just find ways to make it useful and meaningful to you. And that'll be an effective way to network because it's authentic to you. And you're going to enjoy it more if it's like that too. And you're not feeling that it's like a chore. So with that, that concludes what I wanted to share. But if there are questions or, you know, anything I said that didn't make sense, you want to clarify on it, or something I didn't bring up that you want to touch on, I'm all ears. But aside from that, that's what I've got. I hope it was helpful.